Hello, and welcome to Unit 2 of Macro Measures. Today we're going to be discussing economic growth, gross domestic product, and that's kind of where we'll leave it today. So we're going to look at macro measures. And what does that mean? Well, in this unit, we're going to look at how do we promote economic growth and how do we calculate economic growth? How do we figure out what economic growth is? We're going to look at unemployment, and we're going to look at that measurement. And then we're going to look at keeping prices stable. We're going to limit inflation. So we're going to look at something called the GDP deflator and CPI, which is called the Consumer Price Index. Today, we're going to focus on just getting involved with number one. And we're going to look at economic growth. So how do we measure economic growth? Well, we measure economic growth with a very important number in economics, which is called, not number, but thing, which usually is a number, is gross domestic product, GDP. Right? And gross domestic product is just your dollar value of all final goods and services that you produce within a country's border in 1 year. So how do you use GDP? And why do we use it? Well, one, we want to know, is there growth? We want to compare policy work, right? If the president is saying, hey, we've done this, or congressmen and women are saying, hey, we've done this and this and this, and look what it's been doing to our economy. We've had gross domestic product growth. That's important for them. And then we want to know, are we better off? Comparing it to previous years, are we better off? We're going to kind of skip this right now. I'll talk more about percentage change in a different lecture. But this is an important equation that you're going to need to know. This is just a percentage change equation on figuring out. And we'll look at this when we talk about real GDP as opposed to nominal GDP. Before we look at what GDP is, and GDP is consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and net exports, we're going to look at what it is not. And what it is not is intermediate goods, meaning we only look at the final sale of goods and services. We don't look at everything else that went into producing that final good. We only look at the final good sale price. We assume in that price, everything that all the costs associated with that price are in the final price. Non-production transactions. We do not look at financial transactions. So we don't look at the buying and selling of stock, the buying and selling of land, other assets and things like that. And we do not look at used goods. Used goods would be double counting. We want to know what has been produced, what's new in a year, right? So if you buy something and then sell it again in the same year or a different year, we don't double count that. And then non-market activities or illegal activities. So we don't count that. Okay. So calculating GDP, we use something called the expenditure approach here. And this is basically, we just add up all spending on final goods and services. So let's take a look at, well, what kind of spending? Well, it's nice. So there are only really four things that we're going to look at. And that is consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and net exports. And this gives us in our equation down here, it gives us C plus I plus G plus XN. Now, consumer spending is just, it's pretty simple. You go buy a house, a car, a phone, a shirt, a lamp, headphones, whatever, that's consumer spending. That makes up a pretty large portion of our GDP. Investment spending, we're going to get to that one in just a second. I don't want to talk about that one right yet because that's a little different. Government spending. Government spending is the government builds a new freeway. The government contracts a company to build tanks or missiles. It builds a new library, et cetera, et cetera. Something is being produced. The government just writing a check is not government spending. So Social Security checks are not government spending. Those checks will be deposited somewhere, and then people will take that money and go buy things with it, and that is usually consumer spending. And then we have net exports. So net exports can be a positive number or a negative number. For example, in the United States, we usually have a negative or what we call a trade deficit or a negative trade balance, meaning we import more than we export. So in this example, just say the value of 3 Fords is $100,000 and the value of 2 Toyotas is $50,000. This would be a plus $50,000 net exports for. So we would add 50,000 to this. If it were switched and this was $50,000 for Fords and $100,000 for Japanese-made Toyotas, then we would subtract $50,000 from our other added spendings. Investment spending. This is one that trips up students a lot. They think, oh, okay, I invest $50,000 in the stock market. That's $50,000 added to our country's GDP. No, we're not talking about that type of investment. When we talk about investments, what we talk about is the purchase of capital goods by businesses. I'll repeat that. It is the purchase of capital goods by businesses to make their company or business more productive. So it would be Intel buys, 50 new robots to put microchips into its, or put, whatever it is into their processors. Dell buys robots or buys some type of program to help put processors into its computers. Ford builds a new, $10 million factory in Detroit. That would be investment spending. Okay, next lecture, we're going to talk about GDP versus real GDP, and we're going to talk about this very important thing in macroeconomics, which is economic growth. Until next time.